we have a lot on the table to work on that's very important, and keeping families safe and economically advantaged, and educationally advantaged, to me, is the core of what we need to fight for in legislation. So.
Very good. And you've been mayor how long?
Well, 11 and a half years as a council and council at large, only 2.5 years as mayor.
Okay. Very good.
I would just say on the marijuana stuff, if there's a place that we could insert ourselves into that conversation on it's important to me, and I assume for Newark and some of the other ones, that we share in the financial benefit at the municipal level if we're going to be hosting dispensaries or stores, right? Like, there's got to be an incentive. We're the ones that are going to be targeted for locations of these things.
Of course.
And if there's no financial benefit for us to do it, and the benefits are just for the state of New Jersey, which is fine to them, but if there's no benefit locally to do it, it's not worth the headache, is the way I'm looking at it. So, like, I really want to see something where it's like really crafted in the legislation that some portion of taxes or a surcharge is dedicated to those host municipalities. I think it's really important. We got one shot at it, which is the initial legislation to push that, whether it's a 1% fee or a 2% fee, really important. Each of you guys are going to have dispensaries for sure,
It's on the fast track, so you're right. We have to get on board and have our voices heard immediately.
Yeah.
Not down the road, not a year from now.
You're never going to be able to change it in a year, right? So it's like one shot at getting whatever that is, 1% or 2% of that taxes or a surcharge, however you want to do it. I don't know, but there really should be a financial benefit if you're hosting it. Otherwise, why do it? Like, I mean, I'm all for it on a statewide from a legislative policy standpoint, but it definitely is going to come with some headaches, both politically and, I guess from a community standpoint and education and all that stuff on why you want to do it. And it's probably just not worth the headache if there's no benefit to the city, right? Like, at the end of the day. So you really want to see something that financially benefits us,
So I want to say something about that, though. On the social justice side of it, if that's going to happen, I think there needs to be a serious consideration of all of the folks and expungement of these records of individuals who are out here who can't get jobs and all kinds of things because they have records related to something that's now legal. So it
That's
just
right.
it
That's
just
another issue.
right. It just that needs to really be addressed on that side. Like, if we're going to do that,
I agree.
you got hundreds of people who are affected, thousands in the state of New Jersey affected by these marijuana. Some of them are in jail.
Yes.
Right. So how are we going to address that?
Right.
And I think that should be brought up. Obviously.
Very good point.
That's good, it's true.
Very good point.
How do we organize that conversation? Because there's a limited window on that, right? Like that.
Yeah.
So let me say that we had a phone conference with the, at that time, candidate Murphy, or became now Governor-elect Murphy, that this was critical to the urban mayors for a number of reasons. And what you're saying, that there needs to be some benefit back to the communities if they're going to be sort of the recipients of these, these places. That there needed to be some conversation around the social justice issues, the substance abuse treatment concerns, whereas the social wraparound service dollars, because all of those things are going to be critical to the things that we have to think about from an urban perspective. So we have had those conversations already. I've reached back out to his policy people since the election, and we are planning to have meetings relatively soon. We want to weigh in on this. In addition to that, there was someone that reached out to me, and I'm not sure what organization that was, Shoshana, but there's an organization working on this from the social justice perspective. Rick Greenberg, I don't know if you are familiar with Rick. Yeah. So Rick's involved with another organization that's looking at this issue, and they want to hear the New Jersey urban mayor's voices. They want the voices weighed in on this. So we're going to be working with them as well to make sure that we're building a coalition around what the urban communities expect from any marijuana legislation. So we're going to be working immediately on this issue. So our voices will be in the midst.
So we still talking about some issues. Yes. I think you guys have laid out really in your policy recommendations. What's laid out here is clear. That it benefits all of us from school funding formula to Contra Aid. Contra Aid is like very, very serious, particularly in cities that host all of these federal and state, buildings and university, all these tax-exempt properties. We need to be factoring Contra Aid into all of that. Obviously, since they use all of our services, and all of the properties that we cannot get any revenue from whatsoever. I think the state has to take the handcuffs off of municipalities and allow us to be more creative about getting fees from, you know, these kinds of institutions that obviously are not paying anything, you know, for the infrastructure or anything, and the cities have to provide. And I think that is clear, that needs to be discussed. Obviously, the school funding formula, we need to talk about that, because that's going to be very, very heavy on a lot of us. The EDA and the way they distribute their projects, and you know, that's, you know, right now it's just been really more political than anything. And we have to talk about how to make that fair. I mean,
And I think too that they can't cripple our towns either when it comes to, you know, we constantly hear how they want to do away with pilots, and I think that would hurt us in such a way, especially urban communities, because we see the advantages and how we can, you know, build up our communities. You know, and I think that, and it's not only an economic factor, it's also the fact that. I've seen the advantage, you know, it's about creating jobs also, you know, how we can use these pilots to really jumpstart the economy in our towns. So that's something that we need to stay focused on and be very vigilant that they come to us, because that's how we've been able to build up our communities, especially in the urban setting.
So let me interject and say that there are a couple of press in the room. Okay, and we invited press this morning because we thought it was critical to talk about the things that you've been talking about, the issues that are important, and they've just came into the room, so let me just share that. The issues that have been important to the mayors in terms of this report that have come out. So I'm going to ask Mayor Diaz to start in just talking about how we came to doing the report, like Mayor Baraka and Mayor Jackson, who participated by lending their voices to the report in an interview to also share their comments. So we'll start with Mayor Diaz, and then Mayor Kelly as well, for wrapping up.
We thought it was really extremely important that, just let me stand up for a minute. We believe that it was extremely important that the new governor-elect understood the needs of the urban settings, so that we can come together and give them perspectives. What's happening in our cities? You know, what are we doing to make things better in our community? What can help him? You know, give him recommendations so that he can come back and seriously look at the needs of our communities, but at the same time, what can help him? You know, to start thinking that a thought process of what needs to be done to help us move forward our prospective municipalities. So we had several cities were chosen for this project, and it was, when you read it, you see a clear the needs of our cities, you know, from the larger to our middle size down to Bridgeton. So I encourage you to please read this report, because it's a roadmap. It's a roadmap, and I think it will definitely help our governor-elect to be able to go ahead and now understand, at least give him an understanding of the needs of our municipalities.
Thank you. So let me just piggyback on what Mayor Diaz said and say that about 2 years ago, the Watson Institute, in anticipation of the administration changing, did a survey and asked our mayors, asked our membership, what were some of the issues that were pertinent to them? How can we help them effectively serve and move their communities forward? And so between the survey and interviews that we did with 4 of our members, we came together to create a report that we didn't want to call it a blueprint, we didn't want to call it a roadmap, because it's a fluid document. But basically, it's how we see New Jersey being able to thrive. And so that is literally the title of the report, Designing Urban Policy for a Thriving New Jersey. The New Jersey Urban Mayors Association addressed policy priorities. We took a lot of time with this. It's a 2-year process of thinking and asking and looking. Last year's session, as I stated earlier, was a number of mayors around this table speaking to folks that came to the league about what they were charged with doing and how important the issues were to them. And they were interviewed, and we took all of that, and it's a combination of what's happening in this report. As Mayor Baraka said earlier, the recommendations in here really hit home in terms of what we know this governor has to be prepared to do and what the Lieutenant Governor will be prepared to do. So this report will be presented to both the Governor-elect and Lieutenant Governor-elect, and we hope to work in collaboration with them as we move our cities forward. At this point, I'd like to ask Mayor Baraka to just give some comments about his inclusion in the report, the comments that he made when he was interviewed, and the importance of the report, and then Mayor Jackson.
Thank you. I also didn't thank you and my colleagues for allowing me to serve at the Urban Mayors, and I look forward to doing whatever it is that we need to do to make sure that all of our cities are gaining momentum from this new administration and the things that we need to do. And I guess the comments that were directed towards me were around education, seeing as that I guess probably because I was an educator for 22, 23 years before I became the mayor of the city, and centered around charter growth, charter expansion, school funding, all of those kinds of issues. And I think that those are very critical kind of issues for us in these urban centers. Obviously, we can't get in the way of where parents decide that they want to put their kids, but as a manager of the resources, the finances, the community, you have to be involved and on top of how that works, because you do not want to destroy one school system and replace it with the other. The whole concept of choice means that you have options, and replacing is not an option, right? What you're doing is taking away options when you replace things. And then so it's important for us to make all of the schools better and all of them grow. And I think, as I said in my comments, that I think it would be prudent upon us to have a greater say-so at the local level what happens to our school systems, whether charters expand, when they get to expand, who gets to vote on that, who gets to determine who has a charter, who doesn't, because right now we have no say-so in that at all. If the state decides to close a charter school, they can do it. If it decides to open one in your neighborhood, they do it. You're dealing with all of the fallout of that. If they decide that they're going to expand, they're going to do it. You have no say-so in that whatsoever, and I just think that that is absolutely incorrect, and that we should have a greater say-so in that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mayor Jackson.
Thank you again. As Mayor Baraka said, I want to thank the Urban Institute for the great work that they've done with putting together. This initiative is a great document that outlines 10 policy recommendations. All 10, I think, are critical to all of us as urban mayors. But I think there's 3 things I'll say and 2 points I'll highlight specifically. Mayor Baraka just talked about one of those, is the importance of, over the last 8 years, not being allowed to be a partner at the decision-making table. I think it's critical that urban mayors not only sit at the table, but help to have an integral part in the policy decisions that make our cities move. When you talk about who understands that best, that doesn't happen at the state government level. That happens with mayors, and particularly, I believe, as urban cities go, so does the state of New Jersey go. I think we have a governor-elect who clearly understands that and will make a commitment to making sure the urban agenda, the urban policy recommendations that come from here, if we sit at the table, will be a part of where the state draws on its policies to move us forward. So this is a critical document that outlines 10 very critical points that will impact us for the future growth of our cities. But I think there's 2 that I want to talk about specifically. And one is the importance, and certainly through this forum that we've discussed it with the governor, like I've discussed it personally, is funding the school funding formula. So many times people have talked about it, said that we need to get it done. There's been a host of ideas on how to do it. I think the push that we have to have as an organization, just have the governor keep the promise, fully fund the formula, to make sure that schools in our communities in particular have the funding that we need to give our children a chance to achieve academic excellence. That's a critical point. Second, I think, and I believe we all have to push this, a strong infrastructure creates a strong economy that then creates a stronger workforce. We're putting people back to work. Funding infrastructure projects have to be critical. It's a means by which, in particularly cities like mine, where state government rests on so much of our infrastructure. We have over 50% tax exempt properties.
That's right.
When we have infrastructure investment, it puts our local people to work. It stirs the economy in our local downtowns and our local communities. We have to make sure we're at the table to be a part of these discussions, to make sure that we don't get that we have done over the last 8 years after decisions are being made. So I really applaud the Institute, Mayor Diaz, and your leadership for making sure that we had a plan that doesn't talk to just our desires, but a plan that I believe talks to the future of keeping our cities viable and moving in the right direction.
Mayor Council.
Very good.
Well, I would like to continue the discussion on hearing some of my colleagues voice their concerns for the upcoming year. I appreciate what the Institute has done in putting this document together so that something we can all point to and be in agreement that this is what we need throughout the state of New Jersey, not just North Jersey or South Jersey or Central Jersey, but this speaks to throughout New Jersey, and so I appreciate the work that you're doing. One question. The new governor is going to have a lot of different organizations making themselves heard during his first year of office. How can we set ourselves apart so that we can make sure that this document and our needs are fully vetted and fully responded to? Any suggestions?
Well, let me say that historically, the Watson Institute has always had the opportunity to have access to whichever governor has been sitting in that seat.
Okay.
Well, Republican or Democrat, we're a nonpartisan organization. We are seen as such. That gives us the edge, I think, against others. And also, we've typically been able to set up meetings with department heads, commissioners quarterly to deal with New Jersey urban mayor's issues. So I will say, regardless of party, we've always had that access. They see us as a nonpartisan group, and a group that particularly deals with the policy and the policy agenda of the urban mayors. And so I think we'll continue, hopefully, to have that access and that opportunity for this organization.
And Mayor, I think it's really important that we stay focused also on the business and redevelopment of all our communities.
Right.
You know, we have the largest and the most challenges, especially in the area of environmental issues that has actually stopped progress with development in our communities.
Yes.
And I think that they really need to pay attention to that part, because that's what really stalls development, right? It's dealing with the remedial work that has to be done so that they can build, and then, because that's the issue that a lot of us are having in a lot of our communities too, that we have to make sure that the funding is there to help us move along projects. And again, that cause, that has an economic impact, because that puts people to work, right? And it creates the ratables that we need for our community, especially our taxpayers.
I think one of the governor-elect's transition teams deals with urban events also,
Right.
urban affairs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you might be on it, I'm sure.
I think that when you was talking about what can we do, first thing we did was vote for it. Okay, the urban mayor came out
Huge.
and huge. Okay, now when I talk about politics, and this is not political, a lot of people say, listen, if you can give me so many votes, I'm going to listen to you. So those people that have the votes, you'll listen to them. So you need to remind him, all right? I don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican, because this is a nonpartisan group. You need to remind him, your membership is what puts you over the top. This is what we got to hold it, because, in politics, people say all kinds of stuff. And then when they get in office, well, and doing the switch. My thing is to tell them, we put you here. We need to deal with our issues, okay? Urban mayors, urban communities, they put them there. It wouldn't happen if it wasn't for us. We're reaching out because we need help. We need help. We didn't have no help for 8 years. We need help. And we went to you. And I think that just to answer your question about what should we do, you know, that folks is what that urban communities did, and they're gonna, you know, give him some understanding.
I'm going to ask you to say your name because we're
Mayor Michael Blunt,
from.
Borough of Chislehurst,
That's right.
Camden County.
Camden County. Yes,
For your
sir.
comment, can you just give your name?
Other comments?
I mean, you touched on it earlier about Mayor Twiddle.
Okay.
You touched on it.
Pleasantville?
You touched on expungement, which is huge. Crime and unemployment goes hand in hand. Just recently, in the last couple of months, in Pleasantville and Atlantic City, we had huge seminars about expungements. We had lawyers and judges that were there on the spot that volunteered the whole day, entire day. People that had warrants and so forth had the ability to go to court and get those warrants, relieved and expunged and so forth. So that's huge. Crime and unemployment is huge. You want to get the people back to the workforce so they can be productive individuals. There's a lot of things we talked about. Another thing is no one mentioned about UEZ. And that's a major thing for us, distressed towns. I know what it's done for Pleasantville, put people back to work.
Yeah.
So it's one of the things I do want to revisit and talk about. UEZ is huge. Something else that just came in my notes. One of the things I think we're all suffering from is that our property assessed values are going down, continuously going down in the city. I'll give you a prime example. In Pleasantville, we had Verizon. When landline use goes down below 51%, you don't have to pay taxes. And that's a major, major loss in tax revenue and assessed values. So this is a continuous problem throughout most of the municipalities, is the assessed property values continue to decrease. Of course, we pay our taxes by way of assessed value. So that's a huge problem throughout the cities. I mean, just so many different things we can talk about. We just have to take it one thing at a time and work it out.
Yeah.
Mayor Dancero from Roselle.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you, Mayor Diaz and the board and all the urban mayors for allowing me to represent the North on your behalf. I agree, I concur with you that that is an issue, and I know these 10 are so important, every one of them which touches my town. The other thing, since we're speaking about reentry and those issues and expungement, the cost of that prohibits us from helping those that need it. But also there's another issue specifically that has to do with the, as you may know, I made Roselle a sanctuary city against some of the recommendations, but very much supported by our community. But more so, I'd like to see more support and funding for helping people get their citizenship. As you heard, some of the financial difficulties sometimes prevent them from paying the large fees to attorneys that would help, if nothing else, to be able to be in a position of being able to get Social Security cards and actually make contributions, as they already do, to taxes. Many of our non-citizens who have lived in our community for years have been contributing in positive ways to our community and are growing by leaps and bounds. And I'm not speaking just the Hispanic Latino community, but also the Haitian community and other communities who come in. And I feel it's our responsibility to protect them in every way we can and to enhance their opportunities to be treated as citizens of this country. They are, as far as we're concerned, citizens of Roselle, but they need to be supported and helped, and very often they are hiding still in the shadows, terrified of, as you've seen on reports, what happened. So that's another issue I hope later on we can address. I realize we have a lot to talk about here in these 10. The other concern I have is the whole lack of rehabilitation and detox facilities in the state of New Jersey. How can we keep throwing people in jail for an addiction? We say it's an illness. We say they need help. And yet what happens? We put them in jail paying tons of money. They get brief detoxing, the hard way in jails. Put them back out on the street with the pushers, in the same communities with no real job opportunities, and we are perpetuating the problem. Unless you hold a good medical card, or unless you have cash to pay, they have closed down these facilities. Medicaid beds are just not available, and not realistically, time frame wise, to be able to really help, and then to have follow-up in terms of employment, expungement, and all those other things. And I don't know what the statistics, I do apologize, in terms of how many of our urban town folks get into that situation and become then criminal in desperation, because there is really nothing for them. And we keep making excuses and pretending it doesn't exist. But it is a serious issue, and I hope we can address that as well. And last but not least, thank you about the pilots, because that's been a real issue, and I look forward to hearing everybody's suggestions and everything else on this, and to represent your voice and my community's voice and my own in these very important matters. Thank you very much.
Anyone else with any other questions? Want to add anything else?
The only thing that I would add, and this is more on the national level and what we as urban mayors need to do when it comes to the current plan to eliminate private activity bonds as well as advance refunding bonds. And although these are bonds that are referred to as private activity, they nevertheless fund public projects that benefit all of our municipalities, whether we're talking about funding for infrastructure at Newark Airport or at the various colleges and universities, whether we're talking about low-income rental housing. These are the kinds of projects that will be affected if this plan tax reform legislation is allowed to go through as currently structured. And so we as urban mayors need to reach out to all of our congressional representatives to urge them not to support this bill that the president has put forward in terms of his desire to eliminate tax exemption on certain bonds. We will be affected in a very negative way if this proposed tax reform legislation is allowed to go through as currently introduced.
That's your map from Plainfield. So I want to thank you. I'm glad you brought up federal legislation, because we sometimes focus, we're so focused on what's going on in the state. But we're here to support legislation all the way through, from the council to resolutions to state law to federal. So it's important for us to think like that as an organization as we try to make some inroads into the kinds of policies that will be coming out of both the federal administration and the state administration. So thank you.
And I just want to thank everyone again for coming out. It's really been an amazing 4 years working with each and every one of you. I'm looking forward to Mayor Kelly passing on the torch. I'm excited about that, and I want to extend my assistance anytime you need me, Mayor Kelly. I'll be there for you and all the other mayors. But I do want to leave you with this, that for the last 8 years, too many decisions were being made in Trenton for cities instead of the cities for themselves. Whether it's putting restriction on city programs, entering through transitional aid program, or deciding to open and expand the charter school, something that everyone discussed here today. Why are these decisions being made in Trenton without our input? So this is an opportunity for us now with the new governor to be at the table. And again, I look forward to working with each and every one of you. And Mayor, thank you.
As a matter of fact, we lose out on projects that we think we shouldn't lose out on. Projects around transportation, around infrastructure, all of those things that I think that they should be investing in a city like Newark around. And we might get a building here, a building there, a building there, based on, who's involved in that. Whether you got to call a senator or you got to get the private sector to, lean into it heavily. But I think it needs to be more uniform in terms of how they decide what projects get what. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. So, Karen Ross, WMLT. With this new administration, I mean, you talked about schools, like charter schools and all that, but what are some of your other priorities? I mean, in terms of, like, you made a lot of promises. I mean, what are some of your priorities, and what does that look like in terms of how you're going to be getting that done? Like, is it working on legislation? Like, how does that process then begin?
Well, a lot of it is that. I mean, you know, we tried to push several pieces of legislation through our delegation in the city, and they all got vetoed by the previous governor, whether it was trying to get police and fire to live in the city for 5 years, or land banking properties, dealing with our foreclosure issues and abandoned properties, things of that nature. But, you know, a lot of things that are listed in it, the 10 points that we worked on, I think are critical. Contra aid, meaning cities should get aid, particularly around, you know, these cities that host federal, state buildings that are tax exempt, universities, other things that, hospitals, that take up large pieces of property that the city gets no revenue from whatsoever, and the city struggles. So there has to be a way that the state compensates the cities for hosting these institutions in their community.
Can you just tell me a couple of them? Like, what kind of dollars are we talking about that you're missing
We're talking about a large portion of property. We're talking about all the courthouses, federal buildings, universities. The city has at least 5 universities in it, major hospitals, and so cities like Newark, Jersey City, Patterson, Trenton, you know, Camden have all of these state and federal buildings. We have the FBI buildings, we have the post offices, we have all of these buildings because we are the main center, and so we need some level of compensation for that. You know, they're traveling our roads, fire, police, infrastructure, water, all of that. We provide those services, and when aid is being talked about, they need to factor that in and make sure that, or allow us to, you know, because the state of New Jersey, we can't do anything locally unless we have enabling legislation at the state side. So allow cities to be more creative in creating fees to compensate ourselves for the losses that are taken by us hosting all of these places in our town. So, I mean, that's increasingly important for us. Obviously, the school funding formula and how that's funded, Abbott, how that's funded is absolutely critical to us, more than anything. This whole push around marijuana, legalization of marijuana that the governor has talked about, you know, on his face, you know, it's very good, but there's some issues that we have around social justice, making sure that if we legalize it, that there is some grandfathering of a lot of folks who have records. Their records are expunged, and folks that are in jail because it's something now that's legal. The revenue that's created at the state level around this new, you know, industry. How do we get in the cities access to some of those revenues, particularly since we were targeted and heavily hit through the enforcement of marijuana legislative laws. So we need to, you know, be beneficiaries of the reverse of that. So there are a long list of things.
Is there an actual proposal, like a percentage that this comes back to the city, or
right now, no. Right now that I know of, no. I do know that the talk is very superficial. I mean, well, very. You know, I don't want to say superficial. Is at its rudimentary stages. I mean, the legislators obviously have to put a package together and vote on it, and the governor has to approve it. I mean, he can't pass the legislation; he can only approve it. You know, but the legislators have to figure that out.
And then in terms of the people who have prior arrests or records based on marijuana possession or use, you want them to, like, what's being proposed, like, to just, like, treat them as if the law is...
Yeah, my proposition is that their records should be expunged, particularly if you're talking about, you know, these are non-violent offenses under certain amounts of money and transportation and all these other kinds of things. These people their records should be expunged. I mean, there are people who can't get jobs, who can't get licenses, who have fees and fines because they have marijuana, you know, charges.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.